Alright, today we are going over the main reason why your pancakes are not growing. So if you are ready, let's take a look at the function. Your glutes only want to do hip extension and hip abduction done this way, standing. There may be a little bit of an external rotation, but it only happens when you are at the top. And this takes us to the first mistake, and that's going to be your exercise selection. If you are prioritizing the wrong exercise, you're not going to see any growth, or it's going to be really little. And I'm talking about the hip abduction. So many people like this machine, even though this is not going to do much. Although it is training your upper glutes, it is still going to be a mashup of muscles working in this one. It's going to be a lot of external rotators, and it is also going to be some upper glutes, of course. And the next one is going to be something I talked about before, using bands, at least the wrong way. Some people use the band because they want to feel the muscle working, but in some exercises, you're just making things worse. For example, using it for a hip thrust, your body wants to do hip extension, doesn't want to do hip abduction at the same time. And of course, there is the seated hip abduction with bands. It's the same thing. You can change the angle of your body, but your glute, especially the glute minimus and medius, prefer a standing position when your hips are vertical. And I also know that some of you like the conventional deadlift or the stiff leg variation, but if you are trying to train your glutes, maybe you want to ditch those two and just focus on Romanian deadlift. And this takes us to the second major mistake, and this is something I've been preaching on my channel for a very long time. Your execution and setup. Whenever you are training your glutes, it's always going to be a combination of glutes quads or glutes hamstrings. And it is on you if you can bias them or not. And this will always come down to your setup. But let's take a look at the Bulgarian split squat. Keeping your torso upright and pushing your knee forward, it is still going to train your glutes and your quads, but it is biasing your quads. And biasing only means that both of them are working, but one of them is going to work more, and that's going to be your hope that this muscle will fail the exercise and it is going to get the stimulus for growth. If you lean forward, keep your shins roughly vertical, and you just go below 90 degrees, that's going to be here when your other knee is touching the floor, and you are already maximizing this hip flexion under load what you can get, because going further down here is only going to bend at your knee, getting more knee flexions. It's not going to be beneficial for your glute. So remember, your glutes are doing hip extension, so you want to maximize this hip flexion, what it has to overcome. So the same can be said about the squatting. If you just go below 90 degree, no further, because at this point, this is the maximum amount of hip flexion what you can get under load. Going lower than this is only going to be knee flexion, so you're not going to get any more glutes out of the exercise. And this takes us to the other mistake, that's going to be your hinges. Doing a conventional deadlift is going to be the same as doing a seated hip abduction. It's a mashup of muscles working, but it's not the one what you are trying to hit, or at least you can't expect the growth there. But all you have to do is cut the bottom range of motion and only focus on pushing your hip back. Again, same thing, maximizing this hip flexion here, but at the same time, you want to bend your knee, forming a Romanian deadlift. This is going to disadvantage your hamstring. It is still going to work it, but your glutes are working way more to overcome this hip flexion. But there are some mistakes when people are doing this exercise as well. They are exceeding their active range of motion. It only means that once you can't push your hip back anymore, even with knee bend, and going way more lower down, you are only going to load your lower back. While this is not dangerous, if your goal is to build your glutes, you don't want to stop the exercise because your back is hurting. And this will take us to the next mistake, and that's going to be the leg press. It was common belief that keeping your legs together is going to bias the outer region or the outer sweep of your quads. And funny enough, it's going to be the opposite, because if you keep your legs higher and together, it is going to maximize the amount of hip flexion what you can get. So going all the way down, if you look at this hip flexion here opposed to the knee flexion, it is going to bias your glutes more rather than your quads, and you can't get a full range of motion if you keep your quads together. So technically they are disadvantaged, and you can only do that if you go wider on the platform. This way you can go way lower down, but then again the high foot placement is going to stop the knee flexion from happening. So keeping your legs together higher on the platform is going to bias your glutes more rather than your quads. And this is also the reason why I keep telling you that your setup is going to be king when it comes to training. And the next one is glute activation. No, just kidding. There is no such thing as a sleeper muscle. Let me explain. I want you to take a look at three things here. what is the main difference of me doing this opposed to this, just a single leg, or even using a barbell and way more weight? All of them are going to activate your glutes because they were already active. If they weren't, then walking would be quite painful. The main difference is going to be the weight and the amount of muscle fibers or motor units you are activating. If you don't use any weight and you take the exercise to failure, that might take you 200 reps. It is still going to grow your muscle. If I take the moderate weight, that's going to be me doing it on single leg. If I take it to failure, it can produce the same amount of growth if I'm doing it without any weight. And if I'm using way heavier weight, I don't have to do as many reps in order to get it to failure, and it is still going to produce the same amount of growth as doing the other two before. So muscle activation is nothing else, just activating a certain amount of motor units within the muscle. So that is why it is going to be pointless. Even if you bring me here studies saying that, oh, but it was doing this and this, it wasn't, because even just you walking is going to activate the same amount of motor units what I was doing with the glute bridge. Warm up for your sets, but it doesn't mean that you have to do any glute activation. And the final mistake is your programming. You don't have to do 10 to 12 sets of glute exercises every day you are training, and also the order of your exercises matter. Start with a hip thrust because it's going to be less fatiguing for the remaining of your session, and stay within the 5 to 9 rep ranges. And it is also a mistake doing way too many reps that you have to stop the exercise because it's burning so much rather than because your muscle reached failure, or at least you got them close to failure. That is why I prefer if people do exercises within the 5 to 9 rep ranges. After bridges, you can do the lengthened movement. So when you're training your glutes and it's stretched, and that's going to be the squatting pattern. So Bulgarian split squats, hinging. So that's going to be Romanian deadlift. And again, the same thing. Stay within 2 to 3 working sets, 5 to 9 rep ranges, especially with those exercises that are like highly fatiguing. And after that, you can go into the smaller muscle that's going to be the glute minimus and medius. And to train these muscles, you really only have to do kickbacks from a standing position. So it can be either to the side in a hip abduction fashion, or it can be in an angle back behind your body. So just to wrap up things, it's going to be your exercise selection, the way you set up the exercises, how you execute them. There is no such thing as glute activation. Don't waste your time on it. And your programming. What exercises you do in an order, the amount of sets you are doing, and even though the rep range doesn't matter in terms of hypertrophy, I still prefer it in a lower range because it's not going to be the burn stopping you. I am really hoping you learned something from this video, and if you did, make sure to comment, like, share, subscribe to the channel. For coaching, hit the link in the description. Talk to you soon.